Yes, Assalamualaikum, Maulana. It's not particularly urgent, or I just wanted to. I mean, at that time, I just wanted to find out if it's sort of significant to still consider the discussion that we were having in line with like, how do we reconcile some innovations in if it does sort of cause an effect to certain sunnah ibadah or fard ibadah, such as like we mentioned last week, the 8 versus the 20 raka'at, or when the actual start of Ramadan does occur, because that's actually like it's not there's not necessarily extra things, but it might cross over into the realm of sort of compulsory things.
Yes, yes. So, okay, good question. So, like last week, I spoke about um, innovations in different spheres, right? I spoke about innovations in trade. Anything goes there, it's fine. Right? We're not opposed to that over there. Innovations in terms of conveniences of life, anything goes, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Like cars and bank cards and like obviously, okay, I shouldn't say bank. There's a lot more to bank cards than just saying okay, it's fine. But like the idea of having the convenience of your wealth stored in an easily accessible manner, that's not problematic. Um, having different modes of transport, having different ways of cleaning things, all of those things are innovations in the literal sense, but they're not innovations according to technical definitions of Sharia. Nobody categorizes things like that. It only becomes really a sticky point when we're speaking about ibadah, right? And then I said that some people in ibadah, as long as you are doing something for which, like in the category of ibadat, there are ibadat that have a form, a specific form, right? And then there are ibadat that don't have a specific form. And I can give you examples of that. Fasting has a specific form. The specific form of fasting is that you must refrain from food and drink and sexual intercourse from through dawn until dusk, right? And that's what constitutes fasting. It has a very specific form. You can't say, I'm going to fast from Dhuhr till Isha. If anybody does that, then everybody, even those people that say that there's good bidah and bad bidah, even those people will say that's a bad bidah. That is a blameworthy innovation. Why? Because they're taking something for which the Sharia gave a specific form and they are changing that form. So they'll say that's a bidah. But if somebody says to himself, look, I like to fast on my own birthday. So he fasts on his own birthday. Shukran lillah, whatever. How is he going to fast? He's going to fast exactly like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us to fast. He's not going to change the form of fasting at all. Right? He's not going to say that it's sunnah to fast on this day. He's not going to say that it's fard to fast on this day. He's not going to compel anybody else to fast on this day. He's not going to compel anybody else to fast on their birthday, whatever. He's just saying, look, I'm going to do this. So for that person, that won't be a blameworthy innovation. Because maintaining the form of the formal ibadah. The same goes for salah. Salah is something that has a very specific form. Right? If anybody says they want to come up with a salah now, and what they're doing in that salah changes the form of the salah, right? Maybe they add the extra ruku in, or they add the extra sajda in, or whatever, or they add a new position in. Then not those people who accept the possibility of a distinction between good bidah and bad bidah, and those who negate all bidah, all of them will say that this is a blameworthy innovation. This is bad. Right? Then there's other forms of worship that don't have a specific form. Like, for example, expressing your love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It doesn't have a specific form, right? There were companions who did that in like ways that we don't even have access to. One Sahabi drank Rasulullah's blood. Rasul told him, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, taught him not to do that, not to do that kind of thing. But Rasulullah also told him that that no part of his body that the blood of Rasulullah touched will ever the fire will never ever touch that. So it's as if Rasulullah didn't want to create a norm, but he still acknowledged that that person will derive benefit from what he just did. Right? So so something like that, expressing love for Rasulullah, is something that doesn't have a form. So if somebody comes up with with a way of expressing their love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, in which is not contravening any ibadah that has a specific form, right? And he doesn't also give it the wrong hukm. He doesn't say this is sunnah or this is fard or anything like that. He just says, look, this is something that I do to express my love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Then, according to those who accept good bid'ah, they will say that that's fine. And that's a large portion of the greatest scholars of Islam that do that. So, for example, somebody decides that they want to, when the time of Rabi'ul Awwal comes, they want to read the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They want to gather and sing poetry in praise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? It's the time in which he was born sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's just the time reminds us of him, and so we express our love for him. They're not creating a specific form to it. They're not saying there's any value to the form. Like, yes, there is value to the action of gathering to do those things because it increases you in love for Rasulullah. It increases you in knowledge of him. It increases you in closeness to him. It increases your desire to fulfill his sunnah. All of those things. Then, by and large, if I look at the Shafi'i madhab, you will not find a single scholar in the Shafi'i madhab that will have a problem with it. If somebody comes and says, you know what, if you make a salah on the 12th of Rabiul Awwal, and in the salah, you make an extra ruku, or you make the salah at a specific time and you jump up 10 times or whatever, then all your sins are forgiven. And he makes up something like that, then the scholars will by and large say that is a bid'ah. What I mean is that's a bad bid'ah. Right? So I created this distinction now, right? There's things that are not ibadah. Anything goes there generally. Do as much bid'ah as you want to, that's fine. Right? As long as you don't contradict the Sharia. Then we have come to the section of ibadah. In ibadah, there are ibadah that have specific forms and the ibadah that don't have specific forms. If anybody tries to change the form of an ibadah that has a specific form, then by and large, scholars will call that bid'ah. If a person is creating ways in which to fulfill ibadah that don't have a specific form, then generally that will be fine as long as the person doesn't contradict something that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us. Even though it wasn't done by Rasulullah sallallahu, that doesn't mean it can't be done. Right? As long as it's not contradicting any of those things that I mentioned before. Then there's certain other things as you mentioned, like the 12 or 20 and 8 rak'ahs, etc. There we have principles that guide us on that. That was instituted already in the time of the Sahaba, in the time of not just the Sahaba, the Khulafa al-Rashidun, in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, it was already like that. Right? And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam told us that follow me and the Khulafa al-Rashidun min ba'di, the rightly guided Khalifs after me. And so there's a general principle, if it's something that was okayed by the Khulafa al-Rashidun, then it wouldn't be considered a bid'ah. But then there was a more interesting question, or part of your question that you mentioned about like using technology, inciting the moon, and that affecting when we have Eid, etc. So in the time of Rasulullah, they didn't use telescopes, they didn't use any instruments to sight the moon. So where do we take our cue from here in terms of advancing like that? Yeah, the actual ibadat are Eid, the Eid Salah, fasting. Right? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then gave us guidelines as to how to go about determining the times of those things. Right? And in the hadith, it clearly mentions Sumu li ru'yatikum. Right? Fast when you see the moon. This is the word ru'ya. So the scholars look at it like this. They're not they're not talking about bid'ah over here at all. They're asking the question, what does ru'ya mean? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said we must have ru'ya. What does ru'ya mean? So some scholars go the way that ru'ya means seeing with your naked eye. Other scholars say, look, seeing means seeing with your eye. But if you do it aided by instrument, it's still called seeing. And therefore, if I look at the moon with the aid of an instrument, um, I'm still following the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he said that we must fast when we see the moon. So scholars will differ on that. Some will say, no. We have to do it exactly the way Rasulullah did it. Other scholars will say, well, we have to follow the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then you'll have divergent opinions, but both of them are valid ways of looking at it. So people are allowed to hold those different opinions. But that opens up a door to another discussion, because there's some difference of opinion that anybody can, I can differ with another person on something and he can do it his way and I can do it my way. But then there's some differences of opinion where, even the mufti can have his own opinion, but he doesn't have a right to practice on that. If a hakim has made a pronouncement. So for example, when it comes to Eid, and I think this is something that our community by and large don't know. If the hakim in South Africa decides that we're going to have Eid on a specific day, whether he determined that day by the opinion that I deem valid or opinion I deem invalid, I have to have Eid on that day. Even if I felt that we should have fasted another day, I must have Eid on that day and I can fast the day after Eid. But I have to have Eid. The hakim has the right to exercise a difference of opinion, but the individuals don't have the right to exercise certain difference of opinion. But that's a discussion for another time. So in relation to that question about, ways of determining times and that affecting our ibadah, the discussion is not really about bid'ah. The discussion is about definitions and following the command of Rasulullah. So people have different ways of interpreting those commands, and that's fine. I saw Sunir, you had your hand up, Bismillah.
No, just something that I thought of now. So someone that is using glasses or contact lenses, will that now exclude them from being able to sight the moon, or relying on their sighting?
Good question. And it's actually a discussion that was had by some of the Hanafi scholars not very long ago. They asked if somebody that wears glasses or contact lenses sights the moon, can you accept this testimony? So by and large, people just took it as a given, you can accept this testimony. And then others said, well, if you can accept this testimony, that glasses is an instrument of aid in sight. So I can accept it for glasses and contacts. At the time they were speaking about glasses, not contact lenses. Why then can you not accept it for a telescope? So then they again looked to the idea of what is the definition of seeing, right? So they said, look, if you see the reflection of the moon, then it's not called sight. You haven't seen the moon. But if you see the moon refracted through something, then it still counts as sight, according to some scholars. So That would then basically mean you have to look at the mechanism of assistance. If it's through reflection, it won't be accepted. If it's not through reflection, you're actually seeing the moon, just the image is refracted in some way, then it will still be considered sighting. But those are all issues of difference of opinion. And you're going to find these differences all over the place. There's no one way of seeing things. And difference of opinion existed from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And everybody always thought they were right. If they didn't think they were right, they would not have followed that way. And sometimes to think you're right, you have to think others are wrong. Right? But in general, we should understand that from my perspective, I'm right. From their perspective, they're right. And so we should be able to live and live. And sometimes people have this idea that we want to do away. We should just isn't there just a way that we can do everything one way? Try as you might. That existed from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that there was difference of opinion, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was okay with it. They never do away with difference of opinion. There are ways in which we can manage certain issues of communal importance, right? And the Sharia has it within itself to do that already. Most people just don't know it. Most people just don't know it. What happens, right? If I sight the moon with my own two eyes, so we fasted for 29 days. With my own two eyes, I sighted the moon. Then I give my testimony to the Hakim. And I tell him, look, I've sighted the moon. But for some reason, they don't accept my sighting. What must I do? Must I fast the next day?
No,
I
Maulana.
fast the next day?
No, Maulana, you gave the answer back then when we had this discussion with the moon. No, you cannot continue to fast, but you must keep Eid with the community, with what when the Hakim decided.
Right, so that's exactly it. I don't fast the next day because to me, I saw the moon. But at the same time, Eid is an issue of communal importance. I have Eid whenever the Hakim says, even if I have a different opinion. So yeah, that's a slightly different topic too. That's the discussion around ikhtilaf, not just bid'ah, right? So at once we discuss the topic of bid'ah and the ikhtilaf that exists in bid'ah, in the concept of bid'ah, and how do we navigate that ikhtilaf that exists in this concept of bid'ah. And by and large, my advice is appreciate, not just know and appreciate the position of the other. Everybody's doing what they're doing to please Allah. Those people who don't want to do a whole lot of things because they think it's bid'ah, they're doing that because they think that's pleasing to Allah. And on the other hand, those people that are doing all of those extra things, they're also doing it to please Allah. So appreciate that sentiment that exists within the person. And appreciate the argument. And if somebody comes to you with like a downright foolish argument, he says, no, I'm doing this thing because it looks like a good money-making opportunity. I'm instituting this practice with some dini elements and I'm doing it because it looks like a good money-making opportunity. Obviously, yeah, then you can oppose the person. But if the person has something of a dalil shari'i, let him do it. Live and let live. And that's something that we need to inculcate within ourselves. Right? That sometimes I can be right and somebody else can also be right. It doesn't have to be always that I'm right from every perspective and everything else has to be wrong. Right? That's yes, Bismillah.
Maulana, but can there be that there is one that's more correct, that's more right?
There will be one that's more right from a perspective. But if you look from a different perspective, the other one will be more right. So it just depends on which perspective you incline to initially. So for example, in the Shafi'i madhab, right, we say Ameen aloud after we recite Surah Fatiha. As an example, right? Why do we do that? We feel that is and we feel that is closest to the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam according to our legal theory. But the Hanafis, according to their legal theory, they have the same corpus of proofs, but according to the lens through which they view those proofs, to them, it's better that you say it softly. You understand? So, if you ask me as a Shafi'i, I'm going to say, which one is more correct? For you to say Amin aloud. If you go ask the Hanafi, he's going to say, which one is more correct? He's going to say Amin softly. So, in Salah, we stand with our hands folded. As a Shafi'i, if you ask me, can you stand with your hands at your side? I'll say, yes, you can stand with your hands at your side. Which one is better? I'm going to say to stand with your hands folded. If you go ask a Maliki, the Maliki will tell you, it's better to stand with your hands at your side. So from his perspective, that one's better. From my perspective, the other one's better. So it comes down to perspectives at the beginning, right? Or lenses, or your principles of interpretation. And so, as human beings, we have this desire that I want to be following the thing that's most right. But we also have to understand that Islam allows the plurality of views. Yes, you follow what's most right according to your worldview. Let somebody else follow what's most right according to their worldview as well. There are certain things that are indisputably true. For example, if somebody tells you, look, I have a difference of opinion in whether Allah is one or not. No. There the Quran is clear cut. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. There's no other interpretation for it. You can't say, oh, no, Allah is two, Allah is three. The Quran is clear cut on that. There's no difference of opinion. If anybody comes up with an interpretive lens that denies something that is undeniable, then you can say, look, we cannot respect your difference of opinion because your interpretive lens through which you came to that conclusion is wrong. How is it wrong? It's wrong because it goes against something that is definitively right. But this is not going to bring me into a whole usuli discussion about. There's certain statements that can have only a singular purport or a singular dalala, or indicate only to a singular thing, or like only one signification. That I'm using a whole lot of words to say the same thing. And then you get certain words that can have more than one dalala. Right? You can only have valid difference of opinion in the realm of things that have more than one indication, or more than one purport, or that can have potentially more than one meaning. But in things that can only have one meaning, there can be no difference of opinion. Right? And that's why you'll find the core aqidah of all Muslims is the same, exactly the same. The core aqidah of all Muslims is exactly the same. There's certain things in fiqh that no Muslims differ on. Is there any Muslim that says you don't have to perform salah 5 times a day? Somebody may say, oh no, don't the Shia only perform 3 times a day? No. The Shia perform 5 salahs every day. They might differ on the waqt, but they perform 5 salahs every day. There's no Muslim that will differ with you on that. Why? Because the sources of Islam are clear cut on that. There's only one indication regarding that. There isn't a plurality of views on it because the sources don't allow for difference of opinion. I can guarantee you, if there was any interpretive or valid interpretive methodology that could have concluded something different, you would have found somebody concluding something different, but they don't. All Muslims agree on that. Yeah. So there can be something that's more correct, but there's something that's more correct from a perspective. And we are allowed to have different perspectives as long as those different perspectives don't go against like clear-cut principles and clear-cut texts in the Sharia. When I say that, I mean clear-cut texts from the Quran and the Sunnah and the sources of Islam. So yeah. I see there's another mic on. Assalamu
alaikum, Maulana. No, it's my wife's computer, so.
okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Maulana, so if I understand you correctly, the obligation then on us is to understand that limit, which is understand the things where there are specific ways of doing your ibadah. And then everything else, then everything other than those specific items are then is relative. You is not an innovation if you make a change.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then what is the extent? Where does one get that? As in, how does one?
Okay. So that's a very good question. The question that you're asking now is a question of, what responsibility exists on the shoulders of every person to know that.
Yes.
Right. Now, in our Islamic, in the Sharia, we have the concept of ijtihad and the concept of taqleed. Right. Both of those tie in with the concept of learning. So ijtihad is the responsibility to look at the sources of Islam and draw conclusions therefrom. Right? And taqleed is when I am able to just ask somebody that is recognized as a scholar to ask them and then follow what they say. So if I tell you where to find that, where to find all of those perspectives and all of those things, I would have to tell you, you would have to look into the books of usul al-fiqh, of all of the different madhahib, and you will have to look into the fiqh derived from those usul from all of the madhahib. Now that's a very difficult task. I know scholars that have been studying. Look, actually I can tell you every single scholar I know, no matter how long they've been studying, they haven't even read all of the books of one madhab. Right? So it's not an easy thing. Your life has to be dedicated to that. If you want to be a mujtahid, if you want to figure that out on your own. Right? So the tradition of Muslims throughout time has never been that every person has to be like an island and figure out everything for himself. Not even in the time of Rasulullah. Even amongst the Sahaba, there were scholars amongst the Sahaba, and they were the ones who the other companions would go and refer to for information, etc. So what responsibility then exists on the normal person whose entire life is not dedicated to studying these things? His responsibility is to find who he deems to be an upright and knowledgeable scholar. Right? How should you look for that person? You should look at the testimony of other scholars regarding that person, etc. Right? And then he should learn from that person and ask for guidance from that person. He can ask a number of people and then choose from their opinions as well. But the reality is that in fiqh, they say that the normal, ordinary person, he doesn't actually have a madhab. The normal, ordinary person, he doesn't actually have a madhab. He is on the madhab of whoever he asks the question to. So yes, we all in Cape Town say we're Shafi'i. But most people don't even know how to find out what Imam Shafi'i's view was on anything. It takes some expertise to be able to do that, to access the books of Imam Shafi'i, to access the views of the Shafi'i madhab. It takes some learning and expertise to do that. But is it the responsibility of every individual to do that? It's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is to seek out a good and upright scholar that they trust, and then to follow what the scholar tells them to. Or like to direct the question to the scholar and then to accept the answers. And if there's a variety of opinions, they can choose which among scholars that they trust. Then they can choose which opinion to follow, as long as they're not just looking for loopholes all the time. Even if they're just sometimes choosing a different opinion because it's easier, as long as they're not making up something new in that, that's also fine. So how do you do that? Well, you have to study usul al-fiqh and you have to study fiqh. And if you can't do that, if you can't study usul al-fiqh and fiqh, then you must just connect yourself with people of ilm to whom you can direct your questions to. That's all. Islam is not a arduous, unlivable way of life. It's actually a very easy way. Islam has different ways of expressing that for peoples of different types. Does that answer the question? Or
Yes, thank you, Maulana. That does answer my question.
yeah, go on. Okay, our time's up. We're going to end it for now, inshallah. We'll continue our next hadith next week, bismillah ta'ala. You can read it before if you want to. الحلال بين والحرام بين. Right? And then we can pick up the discussion with it, inshallah. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.